special guest. You know, it's been another great day for British democracy. Every day, it seems, almost each and every day, there's a new scandal from Westminster, and it's about corruption and it's about sleaze and all the rest of it. And I think I would hazard a guess that we can safely make the following assertion: the Conservative Party is the best party that money can buy. No question about that. Thanks for joining us this evening. As I said, we have another great guest this evening, and I'm really excited that he's able to join us. Tonight, the TNT show welcomes Alex Salmond. Now, for the benefit of anyone who's been asleep for the last umpteen years, Alex is head of the new Alaba party, and we'll be talking about Alaba and so much more besides. And we're taking your questions live for the next 60 minutes. So the nation talks, but you are the nation. It's not me, it's not Alex, you are the nation. So talk to us, send us your questions, and we'll try and answer as many as we can in the 60 minutes that we've got. Tonight, the nation talks to Alex Salmond. Tell me, Alex, how are you coping with the pandemic?
Well, not too bad. I've got my second JAG tomorrow in Fraserburgh, so I'm looking forward to that. The first one had some ill effects that I'm not going to go into in any great detail, but I was glad to have it. It was well administered in Fraserburgh, I can tell you, and I was asked all the relevant questions, and it was excellent. So tomorrow I'll have my second JAG, and I've actually got a few interviews scheduled for the afternoon, so I better not have too much of a reaction to it, but no doubt I'll muddle through as normal. So in terms of the pandemic itself, I mean, in some ways, obviously, we're talking about a worldwide tragedy. We're talking about lots of families losing lots of people and all the rest of it, and it's been a anguish for so many. There were some aspects of lockdown which probably arrived at a good time for me, actually, in terms of my own personal circumstances. So I actually managed to lose 3 stone in weight, but I put a stone and a half back on again. It shows you what election campaigns do for you. But I think all of us, are going to emerge blinking into the sunlight. And the real task, of course, is to try and find a way to make sure that the world we emerge blinking into is fundamentally different and better than the one that we left. And that is going to require great efforts, because I don't see any real sign of that happening just now. I see a lot of words, but I don't see any deeds.
Yeah. How are you coping personally? I mean, like me, you're no spring chicken. So, an election campaign, starting up a new party, there must be horrendous pressure. How do you
That's
cope?
quite funny. I mean, I always thought that being an MP, when I was a backbench MP, was like running a small business. And of course, going back a while and running the SNP back in the 1990s was like running a small business. The SNP had 4 MPs when I became party leader in 1990. And you had to absolutely work for every ounce of publicity. Nobody would give anything to you. I mean, when I was an MP back in the day, I used to, before internet and social media and all the rest of it, I used to go down to Victoria Station at 11 o'clock to get the first editions of the newspapers. And then I went back to the House of Commons and I started to phone around the radio and the breakfast television, which had just started up, and said, look, I've got a comment on a really big story for tomorrow, reading the papers. And I used to blag my way on to TVAM at 6 o'clock in the morning, because I'd go and record it at midnight out in the green outside the House of Commons. And of course, we'd get somebody better by 7 o'clock and I'd get knocked off the schedule. But I'd managed to get myself into the 6 o'clock spot. And that's the lengths I went to generate some publicity for the Scottish National Party back in the 1990s. Now, it's a bit like that with Alaba. We're facing a media shutout from the BBC, quite disgracefully, incidentally. I mean, I know not many people watching this broadcast will regard the BBC as a public service broadcaster, the public disservice broadcaster. They are absolutely the worst. It's quite of a laugh, actually. I mean, I get accused from time to time by the BBC, incidentally, of working for a state broadcaster and RT. I know that RT is a state broadcaster, but my experience with them is a lot more benign than anything that a BBC journalist or correspondent would have. They never say boo to anything I do. Whereas people in the BBC, unfortunately, are subjected to all manner of constraints. And as an organisation, it certainly doesn't have, well, let's put it this way. There are three great lies in life. One is, darling, I will expect you in the morning. Two is the checks in the post. And three is, I'm a senior executive in the BBC and I want to serve Scotland.
Now, I'm going to take you to task a little bit. I was reading.
Somebody did.
I was reading the what's in the Alaba manifesto today, and in the light of what you just said, and I suspect a lot of people watching this will probably be murmuring and nodding in agreement. I noticed there is no mention of broadcasting. If you feel as strongly as you do, isn't this something that ought to be in the manifesto that say, look, we're going to clean up's the wrong word, but you know what I mean. Make broadcasting, render it under democratic control.
Well, it's a very good point, actually. The problem we had with the manifesto was that we were reflecting the three policy conferences that we've had as a party in the 4 weeks we've been in existence. So can I just plead that Alaba as an organisation have been alive for 4 weeks?
Yeah.
And the three policy conferences which we conducted covered a range of, crucial things: economic reconstruction, independence for Scotland, the women inequalities, the range of health and education issues. And as it happened, although we dealt with arts and culture in Scotland, a very good paper from my old friend Gars, but we didn't get around to a broadcasting paper, and hence the manifesto reflected the policy discussions that have taken to date. However, I have got news for you, and I know that Independence Live loves hot news. On Friday of this week, I'll be speaking to an Ofcom emergency committee convened to investigate the BBC's coverage in Scotland of the election campaign.
My.
And I shall be laying the proud usurper low as I itemise the failings of that organisation. In my defence, as you know, John, as First Minister, I set up the Broadcasting Commission, and which I think the work of which, as 10 years ago now it reported, but was actually very good, and actually was unanimously supported by the entire Scottish Parliament, which was quite something, given that I was in leading a minority government at the time. But very sensible proposals, one or two of which have come to pass, most of which haven't. And the position is as it was. We still do not have a public service broadcaster in Scotland. We still do not have the anchoring, as we should have, of a studio-based movie industry in Scotland. We don't have the facilities to utilise the marvellous natural resource of our scenery and our magnificent light, as all filmmakers tell me, because that hasn't been done as yet. I know there's efforts to do it, but these efforts, need to come to fruition, basically.
Have you heard of Drummonds Law?
Drummonds Law is that broadcasting appears in the time available for its completion.
Not quite. Drummonds Law states that even if every single one of its customers objected to its output, BBC Scotland could continue because there is no local democratic oversight of its conduct.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, probably the last meaningful leadership in the BBC in Scotland, we're talking 30 years, actually.
Yeah.
And just as the last meaningful leadership of the BBC as a whole was Greg Dyke. I mean, the day that Greg Dyke was sacked, it was the day that the BBC ceased to be a public service broadcaster and became what it is now, which is an adjunct of the state. And this, it doesn't mean that every BBC journalist is a waste of space. That's not true. The BBC has fine journalists in many cases, but they operate in a system and an organisation which is systematically there as a state broadcaster as opposed to a public service broadcaster. And it's a great pity because, the BBC probably had the outstanding reputation among the broadcasters of the world.
Yeah.
And as a public service broadcaster, speaking as Lord Reef said, from nation unto nation, it was incredibly effective. As a state broadcaster, it's regarded certainly in Scotland with something close to derision.
Yeah.
And the lack of self-awareness of the top executives of the BBC as to how they're regarded in Scotland is quite something. I think it is regardless of the fact that there's some fine journalists working in it and there's some wonderful people working in it, it is a thoroughly deplorable organisation.
Well, one of our guests about 3 or 4 months ago was Ken MacDonald. And we covered much of this ground, I have to say. But Ken is interested in putting together some sort of, well, I guess it would be a repeat of the commission. So if you're looking for other commissioners or the Scottish Parliament, Ken would be a good guy to meet with. We've had a whole raft of questions, Alex. So even though I've got a whole bunch of questions, we're going to put those to one side and we'll take some from the audience, if you don't mind. I'll start at the top, and it's a long, long list. Phelan Buchanan is asking, why isn't it a priority for the Alba party to press for rejoining the EU when one of the top reasons for Scots wanting independence is so that we can rejoin the EU?
Well, it's a great question. And what we've tried to do in the statements I've made over the last few days in the Alaba manifesto is to spell out what we regard the situation as. We think the overwhelming priority is to rejoin Europe, by which we mean the European single marketplace, the trade, the commerce, the affection that we have in European terms. Actually, some of our immediate proposals could be done now, i.e. the Scottish Parliament could apply for observer status at the Nordic Council. The Scottish Parliament could apply for associate status in the Council of Europe. We think the Parliamentary Assembly in Strasbourg. We think that should be done now. No waiting, no messing, just do it. And both organisations will take us in instead. More substantially, in terms of where Scotland is just now, we should apply to join EFTA, the European Free Trade Association. The 4 countries remaining in EFTA, as Iceland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, would all be enthusiastic supporters of Scottish membership. Something that could be negotiated, I suspect, in 3 to 6 months and approved. And then through EFTA and through the good offices of EFTA back into the single market and the European Economic Area. The EU, best will in the world, even with an accelerated process, even with manifest goodwill among many countries, it's going to be a process that takes a minimum of 3 and perhaps 5 years. And, of course, a lot of countries in the European Union will be incredibly enthusiastic about Scotland rejoining. And we are outside the EU now. Yeah. And many countries, let's be frank about this, would like nothing more than to put one over Westminster. And I can imagine that there isn't even a residue of support anywhere in Europe for Westminster politicians. The problems I had with Mr. Barroso back in 2014 are of nothing now. They are no more. Westminster has no clout, no influence, no pull, no direction with the European Commission or individual member states. But not every European member state is going to be as enthusiastic about Scottish membership as the Swedes, the Finns, the Danes, and the French and the Germans will undoubtedly, and the Italians actually, will undoubtedly be. Some member states are going to have doubts and questions. Spain probably in the van, but others as well. So this is not going to be a walk in the park for us. And it is absolutely vital that we don't conduct these negotiations from limbo. The negotiations that we conduct with the European Union on future membership should be conducted from a position of strength. And I believe a position of strength would be an early accession to EFTA and the European Economic Area. being an EFTA and the EEA, it's not a bad berth. I mean, Switzerland, Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland are all comfortably in the top 15 in the world in terms of wealth per head. This is, whatever else it might be, economically, it's not a bad place to be. And people say to me, well, Scotland isn't like these other countries. Switzerland obviously has a huge tradition in financial services. My goodness, if only Scotland had a huge tradition in financial services. Norway, of course, is a huge resource economy with hydrocarbons coming out of its ears and ample supplies of renewable energy. I mean, my goodness, if only Scotland had hydrocarbons and an ample supply of nuclear energy. And Iceland, of course, is a country surrounded by a continental shelf and fantastic natural resources and fish stocks. Well, my goodness me, if only Scotland was surrounded by a massive continental shelf and ample supplies of fish stocks. I'm merely saying that isn't a bad place to be. And whether you think that is a permanent place to be, or alternatively think it's a great staging post in which to negotiate European Union membership, it's something that could be achieved in early course. And Alba says, let's do that, and then let's negotiate with the EU, and let's put the decision on the European Union future membership in 3 to 5 years' time, however long it takes, to the Scottish people in a referendum. So our policy is pragmatic. I've got one thing on this, John. I'm greatly affected because we're all part of all we've experienced. 25 years I spent representing the fishing communities, the great fishing communities of Scotland, at the heart of the fishing industry in the Buchan Corner. Peterhead, the largest whitefish port in Europe. Fraser were an amazing port for langoustine and shellfish. These people were among the most pro-Brexit in the UK, and certainly the most pro-Brexit in Scotland. A minority, but pro-Brexit. They have been betrayed. They have been let down. They've been sacrificed, jeopardized. They have, go wind the clock back 3-4 years, and you couldn't go down to Peterhead Harbour without tumbling over Nigel Farage or Michael Gove or Boris Johnson. They're nowhere to be seen now. And what's happened now is the family businesses built up over generations are in serious trouble. They've survived so many things, but can they survive a collapse in the marketplace? With the prices for langoustine, for shellfish, for quality whitefish, the European market just obviously aren't there. Now, they would have been having difficulty anyway because of COVID, but they're having maximum shutout because of COVID plus Brexit.
Now, take you back for a second. You mentioned the oil industry, and we've had some questions about that. Our Alcock, his question or her question is: Alaba supports, in quotes, support the transition away from fossil fuels by introducing a wellhead production tax on Scotland's offshore oil industry, close quotes. How else will Alaba support a rapid and fair transition from oil?
Well, I think that's a very interesting move in the Alaba manifesto. It was one actually suggested by Jim Walker, who's one of the Alaba candidates, a world-ranked economist. He points out that corporation tax is a very ineffective and pretty useless way to tax a hydrocarbon industry. And a wellhead production tax gives you much more flexibility. And where we see the importance of this now, I mean, I believe, and one of my great regrets is not convincing that idiot Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown to go ahead with their promises with regard to the Miller project, which was the great carbon capture project of 2005 to 2007. If that had been done, and ultimately I offered as First Minister Alistair Darling, who was Secretary of State for Trade and Industry at the time, offered him the option that there could be a renewable certificate, ROC as it was called then, to treat the Miller project as if it were an offshore wind farm, just one of many, as a pilot project. And if that had been done, we in Scotland right now would have had the world's first commercial hydrogen power station, re-injecting carbon dioxide into the Miller field in the North Sea, and we would have had almost a closed cycle in terms of environmental damage as a project, commercial and working, and the great innovators and scientists and industrialists of the planet right now would be beating a path to Peterhead Power Station to see how it was done, a pre-combustion carbon capture project, resulting in a hydrogen economy for the northeast of Scotland. All that wasted because Alistair Darling couldn't see beyond the end of his nose, and Gordon Brown was a skinflint.
Yeah.
Now, is it too late? All these years later, no, it's not too late. Carbon capture is still, in my estimation, a major possibility for hydrocarbons, and it has to be supported. And it has to be tested on a commercial scale. And what better way to do it than to have a wellhead production tax on existing production to finance the carbon capture projects which will reconcile the oil and gas industry with the future of the planet? And what better place to do it than the North Sea, which has a large number of fields which could be more productive if carbon dioxide was injected back into the field. And what better place to do it than the Northeast, where we have a power station which could easily be converted into a hydrogen power station, a totally clean burn power station, with all the benefits that would have in terms of stimulating a hydrogen economy in a place where the oil and gas industry has massive research potential. In addition, which has the conditions for offshore renewables unrivaled anywhere on the planet, and the potential to research marine renewables as well. Now, that's our vision for where we should go with the Scottish Energy. And I think the shift from a corporation tax, which depends on companies fiddling their profits, to a wellhead production tax, where you can itemize and adjust depending on how much production and how much progress has been made with regard to carbon capture and other ameliorations of the damage that hydrocarbons. It seems to me that the way that a public sector and the government can exert influence to make sure that the industry, valuable, important, innovative that it is being guided in the right direction in order to make the northeast of Scotland not just a major oil and gas capital of the world, but a major energy capital of the world.
Okay, good point. We've had a whole load of questions, which I suspect you've answered a million times, but I'm going to ask you again. Marlene Deans is saying, is Alaba standing in any constituency seats?
None whatsoever, because we're not in competition with the SNP. I mean, I'm amazed in terms of some. I know that politics is always based on human interaction and all that sort of stuff, but I'm amazed at two things. One is the SNP doesn't see the benefit of Alaba. Alaba is not competing with SNP in the constituency. It's standing on the regional list. If half of the SNP supporters last time, the million SNP independent supporters who voted SNP in the list and got precisely 4 MSPs for their pains, if half of these people vote for Alaba, there'll be 30 Alaba MSPs in Holyrood. Independents.
So how do you respond to some people who say, well, this is Alex Salmond and Alaba gaming the system?
Well, luckily there was a panel-based poll on that very subject published in Wings Over Scotland yesterday, which showed that 75% of people in Scotland don't agree with that argument, and 90% of SNP supporters don't agree with that argument. What they think is, if people want to put themselves up for the regional list, they should do so.
Yeah.
And people will either vote for them or not. And all I'm saying is, if half of the SNP supporters from last time vote Alaba, there'll be 30 Alaba MSPs elected. That's an arithmetic fact. And you have to decide if you believe. I mean, if you don't believe in independence, then fine. People who don't believe in independence, to them it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
But to somebody who believes in independence, it should be a dream.
Yeah.
Because without sacrificing anything from the SNP and and I'll be voting SNP in the constituency ballot, without sacrificing anything, there's the opportunity to send another 20 or 30 independents supporting MSPs into the Scottish Parliament to demand the immediate start of negotiations on independence with Boris Johnson and inject some urgency into the independence argument.
So who will you be voting for in the SNP?
Sorry? I'll be voting for Gillian Martin as the candidate MSP is now for Aberdeenshire East.
So you'll be voting for Gillian Martin? I'll
be voting Gillian Martin for the constituency and Alaba on the regional list. And there's some guy at the head of that regional list, I can't remember his name. He claims to have been First Minister, but I mean, surely that's just a guy's.
Here's a question for you from Stephen Kelly. Stephen would like to know this. He said, Alex, are Alaba working in private on the ground with the SNP to get this super indie majority?
Well, I hope so, on the ground. I mean, I was doing a launch today in the Falkirk Wheel, which was a really good place to launch the Central Scotland campaign for Alaba with some great candidates led by Tasmini Ahmed Sheikh and others there. Fantastic Margaret Lynch and Caroline McAllister and Jim Walker were there for launching. Lynn Anderson, I beg your pardon, was there launching the campaign for Central Scotland, and there was this chap arrived with kind of unannounced, and he had a van with an SNP, vote SNP, and a vote Alaba on the van. so anyway, whatever's happening generally, he's obviously working for the independent supermajority. So I got my picture taken in front of an SNP symbol, and he got his picture taken in front of an Alaba. So it's happening. I think it's happening. But look, never mind what High Hegians say. This High Hegian says vote SNP in the constituency, Alaba on the ballot.
Okay.
Never mind people whose feathers are ruffled. Anybody who understands the arithmetic, who wants to see Scotland move forward to independence, will be voting SNP in the constituency and Alaba on the regional list.
Okay. Yeah, moving on to finance and economics for a second. James Cullen is asking, will Alaba engage positively with economists who promote MMT theory, as opposed to those who believe a government that borrows from itself is creating a deficit?
Could you give me the theory again? I mean, is that new monetary that's been asked about? Or?
Modern monetary theory.
Yeah, new monetaries, as I thought. I mean, this is a strange thing for me to say. I'm quite friendly to new monetarism as an economist. I was talking to Jim Walker today. I'd put out something, and this is a true story. I put out something that said, look, Alaba has 18 women candidates, 14 men candidates. We've got 7 elected councillors standing for election, of 4 former members of the SNP National Executive Committee, 1 farmer, 1 former boxing world champion, 2 economists, 1 former First Minister. And Jim Walker said to me today, who's the other economist? And I said, it's me. I'm the other economist. Okay, I fell among thieves at Westminster in 1987, but I'm still at heart an economist. And I said, oh, really? I didn't realise. That's so fine, One of my own candidates doesn't realise. But, Jim is a great economist, incidentally. This now part-time economist is rather friendly to new monetarism, which is rather interesting because I'm a pretty old-fashioned Keynesian, and I was extremely hostile to old monetarism, the free control of money supply theory. I am friendly to the idea that we are in an era where people have to understand that because people are looking for secure assets, then interest rates have been driven to incredibly low levels. This should be seen as an opportunity, not to enrich the bankers and those with connections. This should be seen as an opportunity to refurbish, to reconstruct, to invest in the physical infrastructure of the nation. Now, let me give you an example, and just give me a wee bit of time on this, John, because this is really important. The SNP has the most ambitious housing programme of any of the conventional Holyrood parties. They're going to spend £3 billion, I think, over a 10-year period to refurbish or to create 30,000 new socially rented houses. Right, great. Except it's about a third, if that, of what's required. If we're going to tackle the Scottish housing crisis, if we're going to have the availability of a variety of types of homes to rent, we don't need a £3 billion of expenditure over 10 years. We need 10 billion over 5 years. We need not 30,000, we need 100,000. And we need other things. We need a new generation of care homes, purpose-built, properly built, to improve the amenity of the residents, and also the capability of making them secure from health challenges and all sorts of stuff. To do that, we're going to require the powers of independence. You're not going to do it within a devolved budget, no matter how hard you try. You can make a start, of course, but to do it, you've got to have borrowing powers. Now, if the Scottish National Investment Bank could borrow right now, it would have no difficulty whatsoever in borrowing not 3 billion, 10 billion over a 20-year period.
I guess
probably just over 1%.
I guess the modern monetary theory would say you don't have to borrow the money, you can just print it.
You could print the money, of course you could, but you could, well, let's just take it on where we are now. You could borrow that at 1%, no more than that, over a 20-year bond right now. And you can invest in Scottish housing infrastructure for a rate of return, well, certainly not less than 3%. And I'm being very, I should use the word advisedly conservative there. So what's not to like?
Yeah.
That could reposition, recast, reconstruct a huge area of Scottish economy and Scottish society, and do it on a basis that meets the scale of the challenge. The one thing you'll need is borrowing powers or a new monetary system, the ability to have a Scottish central bank and a Scottish currency.
Yeah.
But whether you do it by a generation of capital and credit and borrowing against yourself, which is what the monetarism would tell you, or whether you do it conventionally in the marketplace, you have to be independent. Okay. You can't do it with devolution. And incidentally, if you care about Scottish housing and a recovery from COVID, you're not going to wait, as some people tell us, till 2023 or 2026 if you're the Greens. You're going to start that process now to get into that position as quickly as possible to do what's necessary to protect people.
Well, you talked about infrastructure. Here's a specific question that's cropped up on infrastructure. Paul Donaldson is asking, will Alaba support completion of dualling of the A9 and A96?
Yes.
The
same argument, I'll tell you why. The same argument applies. There is any amount of capital available at reasonable rates, either by direct borrowing, backed by government guarantee, by bond issue, or once you have the capability through a central bank. And this, incidentally, is why people say, oh, why didn't you support a Scottish currency immediately back in 2014? Because we were in a different world in 2014. We were in a world where not only were interest rates nothing like they are at the present moment, but we were in a world where our major trading partner, England, was going to be a continuing part of the European Union and the single market with us. And there'd be no immediate sign, nor should we wanted any immediate sign of a variation in these trade patterns. We are now in a world different entirely in terms of the international context and what's available in terms of capital. And secondly, in a world where Brexiteers have taken the UK into the mid-Atlantic to be some sort of reborn Singapore with none of the climatical or other advantages. In these circumstances, we should be actively planning to diversify Scottish exports away from that market, which will be in inevitable decline, towards the strength of other markets internationally. And that means that the argument for being in sterling over the medium term is no more. The argument that, oh, well, we better stay in the same currency as our major trading partner is no longer what it was in 2014. Keynes, the greatest English economist who ever lived, once said, when the facts change, I change my mind. The facts have now changed, and the independence case has to be brought to terms with reality. Because believe me, reality will not come to terms with the independence case.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I've got 35 questions. and we've only got 20 minutes or so.
Carlo, my glamorous assistant, to see if you can get the plug from next door, because this has got 10% left. So it's through the next door, Carlo. No, through where we were. This is the iPad plug. I think if we can get it plugged in. But anyway, on you go. We've still got 10% left.
Does Alaba think Orkney and Shetland should have more powers and have a relationship with Scotland similar to that between Denmark and the Faroes?
I mean, I did the initiative on the island councils and the island agreements and things as First Minister. I think that should have been continued, to be quite frank, in some sort of fashion, because we came to terms with the island councils in terms of what they wanted and what could be provided, and that was a good move before 2014, because it meant that the divide and rule tactics of the Unionists couldn't be deployed in any effective way, and they weren't in any effective way, and that didn't happen by accident. I mean, if you compare it with the 1970s, where they were talking about nothing else but, Shetland being part of Greater London or whatever.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if that's been pursued with the same degree of enthusiasm overall, and it should be, because the island communities have distinctive needs and they're entitled to distinctive status. And as long as people, my view on this, as long as people are treated with respect, they'll regard themselves as an integral part of the Scottish nation.
Yeah.
And the only danger you have is to do to the islands as Westminster has done to Scotland, to alienate people through your attitudes. And if you don't do that, if you show some understanding and empathy, then everything will be just fine. But yes is the basic answer. That I'm in favour of more island autonomy and more island responsibility.
One last question about economics, if I may. What's your view on the Growth Commission?
You mean the No Growth Commission? Look, I'm not going to get into. I've said during this campaign, I'm going to keep things on the national and on the positive. Obviously, I've known Andrew Wilson for a long time, and obviously he's a talented person, and etc., 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 etc. But I think the SNP have been extremely fortunate in the weakness of the opposition that they've faced over the last few years. Because if you ever wanted to have an albatross hanging around the neck of any movement, then the Growth Commission was that albatross. I'll give you one example of many. The idea that Scotland, who has had its resources and its potential cut off, subject to unkindly cuts over many years, should be paying effectively what in the Growth Commission was suggested as reparations to look, nobody is going to exceed my wishes to be friendly to the English. I think England's a fantastic nation, of a fantastic history, a wonderful cultural heritage. I think they're infinitely better than the politicians they've recently elected. All of these things are undoubtedly true. And also, I think the majority of English people are vastly fair-minded. If Scotland wants to be independent, I'll say good luck to you. The idea in the Growth Commission that we should be paying some sort of subvention for not being able to be the most prosperous country in the world, which we would have been if we'd followed the Norwegian course and path over these last 30 years. It beggars the imagination. And I know why sometimes people have have a cringe, a chip on their shoulder, a sort of understandable urge to demonstrate how nicey they are. The English people I know, the plain people of England, treat such obsequious behaviour with contempt, and the contempt it deserves. The Growth Commission was wrong-headed in a variety of ways, mostly in terms of not accepting the implications of its own advice, to realise that the process of independence will indeed spark a revival in economic and hopefully sustainable growth in Scotland, and any calculation of the economics of independence should take account of that.
Okay.
Offering people what the Growth Commission offered or proffered is a substantial own goal, which persuaded many people in the SNP that perhaps they should be organising to a different drumbeat.
Okay. Thanks for that, Alex. Here's a changing tone and changing subject completely. Here's a question from Angela Leach, and she says, my son lost a trans friend, Jamie, to suicide. Does the Alaba party have any plans to help minorities like my son's friends? And what could help them from killing themselves and make for a more equal and fair, user-friendly environment and society for all?
Well, I think in the Alaba argue that we've got to, you give me just a second, we're going to find a place to plug this in. There we go. I'm told by Carlo it's where the button is. Mm-hmm. That could well be. Is that on? Yeah. You switched it on. Excuse me. I think the Alpha proposal in this is by far the best. I mean, this self-identification is causing, huge disruption in people in society who should be on the same side. Joanna Cherry is, a long-standing friend of mine. And a long-standing feminist, lesbian campaigner, old school from, people who are battling for recognition of gay rights when society, every hand was turned against them. When people like that are described as transphobe and attacked as transphobe because they are standing up and asserting hard-won sex-based rights gained over a generation and more, not just the women's toilets, but I mean medical facilities, the right to be examined by somebody of your own sex, the dignity and aspects which are accorded to that. If somebody's arguing for that, you can't do what's been done and say, well, deplatform this person, we'll be, describe her all sorts of names, we'll take down our Twitter accounts, we'll do this, that, and the next thing. It's extremely bad. Therefore, what we have to do is find a way to take the heat out of this issue. The Citizens' Assembly idea, which has been pioneered is one of the things that's come out of the Scottish Parliament in recent years, which is actually very beneficial, very good. Let's take it there. Let's people examine how you can embrace equality for all without jeopardising the hard-won sex-based rights of women, and do it on a basis where there's more light than heat, and we can come to an agreed position.
Okay.
I sometimes wonder about folk. I'm the first minister to introduce equal marriage in Scotland. I'm the one who went in to talk out the issue with the various denominations of Scotland, every single one of whom was hostile to the proposal, with the exception of the Quakers, who could have been more forceful in their supportive arguments. And what I found was, as you talk the issue through, we got people to realise it was a matter of justice. When some of the opposition started to moderate, I think if things are explained and talked over in a proper manner, then we'll see the same thing happening in the Citizens' Assembly. But what you cannot do, you cannot label people who've been campaigning for gay and women's rights for a generation, like Margaret Lynch, as transphobe or anti-gay or whatever they're being labelled with. You can't do that. It's not right, and it shouldn't happen. And we have to find a way to take the heat out of this debate and introduce some light and mutual respect, which is what Alaba suggests.
Okay. There's a question here that's come in from a number of people. They're asking, and you probably need to temper your language here a little bit, perhaps. What does Mr. Salmon think of the Gers figures?
Well, Gers was always a suspect calculation for a range of ways. In some ways, I regret that I didn't. I mean, what I tried to do with Gers is it's Gers rather than Gers, I think. Gers is Glasgow Rangers football club. But Gers, I tried to improve it, take away some of the silliness of it. But, there have been, as you know, you are and I am acquainted with serious economists who've pointed out the faults and foibles in Gers. I mean, the problem is that people have always assumed it measures something it doesn't. I mean, at best, and it is at best, the Gers measures the performance of Scotland fiscally within the state of the United Kingdom, given the state of the United Kingdom, ascribing to Scotland all sorts of expenditures which no sensible country would undertake. Manifestly and obviously, the possession of nuclear weapons on the River Clyde or whatever. Now,
accepting that, Alex,
that is not something. That's not a path we should take.
Yeah, isn't the logic then that follows from that let's junk Gers and replace them with something which the Scottish Parliament approves of?
Yes.
Simple, surely.
I agree, John. There you are. There's a nice short answer. I agree. You note that down and use it against me.
You need to move a little bit central, and you're shifting to your.
Right, okay.
That's better.
I'm blaming Carlo.
I noticed that it's a personal thing of mine. I noticed that Alaba has signed up for a written constitution. Is that an important consideration for you personally?
Yeah, well, it is, and I actually did a good thing. I mean, for a change, I got Jim Sillars to do a paper on it. Alaba's held 3 policy conferences in 4 weeks. I mean, that's just quite something, actually. Great stuff. I mean, I listened to every word spoken in every one of them, and magnificent contributions. I had a brainwave, and I got Jim to write a paper on a written constitution, and as he often does his best, he went right down to fundamentals. I'd managed to, I think, make it come alive. So it's not a dry, arid, techie obsession. There's something that goes to the heart of society and democracy.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of work done. A lot of people have contributed to this, been right back from the late Neil McCormack onwards, and there have been working groups and people have been involved in this process, and Jim gives acknowledgement to all of these people. And that's a good thing. But the proposal he made, again, using the Citizens' Assembly with expert help and advice, going to a convention and then presenting that this is a big thing. Maybe a year or so into an independent state, you would have the people debating and discussing and then voting on the Constitution, asserting the primacy of something that's right and proper over the government, over the legal system, over any citizen, over any private interest. I mean, there's something irresistible. Now, for Scotland, it's even more irresistible for reasons that you and I both know, because it's inherent in the Scottish constitutional tradition, the idea of popular sovereignty. We were arguably the first European nation, at least on earth, to endorse and embrace the concept. And although some people say, look, what's 700 years ago got to do with 2021? Everything. Unless you base an independence on your history, your tradition, your culture, unless you imbue that history, tradition, and culture into your fellow citizens, then your independence will be based on shaky foundations.
Yeah.
I despair, absolutely despair, of the lack of interest of many people in the national movement into the constitutional traditions of Scotland. The people who don't understand the significance of that cannot really understand the significance and the importance of Scotland's move to independence.
Here's a question. Thank you for that. Here's a question that comes up time and again, Alex. And this one is from Susan Campbell.
And Patty has arrived. Hurry up.
Before you dig into the refreshments then, Susan Campbell Creighton is saying, one of the biggest arguments against voting for Alaba on the list is that back in 2011, that both votes for SNP worked. She says, how do I explain that to people who are interested in voting for Alaba on the list?
And who did you say asked the question?
Susan Campbell Creighton. Suzanne,
right.
Sorry, I beg your pardon,
okay.
Suzanne.
Well, actually, you've asked exactly the right question of exactly the right person, Suzanne. In 2011, I did not argue for 2 SNP votes, both votes SNP. On the list vote, we argued for Alex Salmond for First Minister. Rightly or wrongly, actually, right as things turned out. We gave people a reason for voting on the list, which was to make me continue to have me as First Minister. The SNP haven't given a reason for voting on the list, because there isn't a reason. Just repeating the mantra, both votes SNP, doesn't cut it.
Yeah.
We know the SNP are going to be totally dominant on the constituency section, and rightly so, because the opposition is rubbish. I mean, we're talking about powder puff, useless, ragtag and bobtail opposition from Tories, Labour, Liberal Democrats. So the SNP are going to sweep the constituency section. If that happens, SNP votes on the list will be wasted. Totally, utterly wasted to the independence cause. And some people say, oh, well, we could vote Green. I mean, when I became First Minister in 2007, there were 2 Green MSPs. There were Patrick Harvey and Robin Harper. Patrick was sort of in favour of a referendum on independence. I wouldn't describe it as a matter of conviction for him, but he was sort of in favour. Robin Harper was and Robin was a very nice man, a very good parliamentarian, excellent guy. Robin was dead against independence at any price. They were 50-50 split at best, and frankly, I would count Robin's substantial opposition rather more heavily than Patrick's anemic support. And so it's continued. Patrick last election said, well, it's not really the Green agenda to support and promote independence. And the Lorna Slater, isn't it? The Green co-convener in this election, just on Sunday there, said, it's not part of independence, not part of the idea that, the Greens are a perfectly valid political party here and elsewhere, embracing a fantastically important movement for fundamental change in society. All of these things are true, but describe them as in their waters an independence supporting party is stretching hope over experience.
Yeah.
Alaba is an independence priority party. And if just half of the SNP voters from 2016 switched to Alaba on the regional list, then we shall elect 20, perhaps even 30 additional independence supporting MSPs into the Parliament, which will make the world of difference if you want Scottish independence. Now, if you don't want Scottish independence, then fair enough, vote somewhere else. If you want Scottish independence as a priority on the vote independence and vote Alaba.
That's interesting you say that, because we've had a whole bunch of questions about, bearing in mind the antipathy that's also already been demonstrated. People are asking, how the heck are you going to be able to work with the SNP in the Scottish Parliament, assuming you're elected, along with 29 or so others?
No, the antipathy is not from me. I mean, I love the SNP. I adore it. That's why I'm endorsing it in the constituency. But, when it comes to accepting the verdict of the people, then you should put national before anything personal. Alaba doesn't want to be in government. We don't want to be in a coalition. We will offer ideas on the social and economic sphere, ideas which we think are long overdue. But our sole absolute priority is to push the independence argument forward, to be the grit in the independence oyster. People say, oh, well, we get an independence majority anyway. There's been an independence majority in the Scottish Parliament for 5 years. And nothing substantial has happened. Now, I'm sure that people thought, oh, well, only we wait till after Brexit, only we wait till after the referendum, only we have to wait till after the thing is negotiated, if only we wait till after the pandemic, if only we wait for this and wait for that and wait for the next thing, then will be the right time to carry forward independence. That seems to me in danger of saying the time will never be right. There'll always be something more important, more urgent, more of a priority than forcing forward the independence argument.
Okay.
Alaba says the independence is the priority, is the urgency, and needs to be done now.
Alec, thank you for that. You've been through, it'd be fair to say, a bit of a torrid time over the last 3 or 4 years or so. How have your family been affected by all of this?
Well, I mean, it's actually 2.5, although I have to say, John, it seems like longer.
Exactly.
Bearing up and relishing as I am the opportunity to do what I want to do, and I've always wanted to do all of my life, which is to present the arguments for Scottish freedom and Scottish independence. All the people, it doesn't matter. Well, of course, it ultimately matters, incidentally, more than anything else, how innocent you are. I mean, the jury verdict is the thing that matters. I mean, everybody, most people, the vast majority of people just accept the verdict of the jury. Not the BBC, of course, but they're a kind of special case. They know better than anybody in society. But the vast majority of fair-minded people say, like, the verdict's in, let's move on. But if, as I have been able to talk and speak about nothing else for 2 years than accusations levelled against me, if you're in there mud wrestling, you're going to get dirty. Doesn't matter if you're innocent, you'll get dirty. And therefore, this campaign, John, has been a bit of a release for me. I'm enjoying myself enormously. I'm having a hell of a time. And like nothing better. Well, last week I spoke to 104 European, overseas, international journalists in the International Press Corps. In one press conference, I think it's just had a fantastic time. And what's really fantastic about it? Every single question was about the future of Scotland, about things that matter. And just about any one of these international journalists could have held a seminar for the Scottish Press Corps, who collectively, well, they would have slept through the sermon on the Mount.
Well, our time's almost up, Alex. Thank you. It's been very, very interesting. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as the audience clearly has. We've had more questions tonight for you than any single guest. And we've done 50 shows, by the way. So 50. We're not wet behind the ears.
Are you looking for some sort of quake or something for your 50th show?
I'm simply stating a fact. Simply stating a fact that here you are. You're pulling in the audience. Good style. Thank you. I appreciate it. Susan Campbell, by the way, Creighton has been back to say, Alex, you look tired. Take the rest of the evening off and relax. Please.
No, I'm going to have my pate and oatcakes. I might even have a wee sip of champagne red. This is all very So I should explain this a totally private occasion, nothing commercial about this whatsoever. All COVID compliant and all the rest of it.
Well,
so
you
what,
deserve it.
what I would say, Suzanne, etc. We've had an active day. I started in Aberdeenshire at 7 o'clock this morning, and I'm currently in Livgate. And I'm heading back to Aberdeenshire now. But as they say in all the best stories, I retire tired but happy.
There you are, Suzanne. There's the answer to your question. Thank you for that, Alex. And as always, we have a formidable list of guests coming up. You can read about them in the www.whatsonguide.scot. We're back next week, and I'm hoping that again we'll have a very special guest. Next week, we hope to welcome Nicola Sturgeon. Not to be missed. We're waiting for our team to come back and confirm or otherwise that April 28th works for her. But let's assume she's going to be with us. Get your questions in, as you did with Alex, well in advance, so we can make sure we get a chance to put the questions to Nicola. And also a reminder, please, look out for Dr. Elliot Bulmer's Constitution column in the Sunday National. He's going to be talking about, listen to this, he's going to be talking about the new groups that have been formed. Alex will know all about this, to bring about independence for Northumbria and the north of England. Maybe at this pace, they'll be independent before we are, who knows. And very importantly, please, the folks who put together Indie Live, Kevin Gibney, etc., do a fantastic job. They provide all of this for you free, there's no charge, and I can tell you it's a quality offering. You'll see all about it in the What's On guide. Support Indie Live wherever you can. And bearing in mind Alex's remarks about the BBC and other institutions, they very much deserve your help. Thanks again. Good night, and join us next Wednesday. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night. Thank you, and thank you to Alex.
Bye, John.
Good evening, everyone.